sorry, boy. I have to abandon you for the content grind. It's not serious. I know. You're taking it so hard. You gotta lick your asshole to yeah. Resident Evil Requiem. I decided once I, got this little studio set up and running, I'd treat myself with a little video game. And oh my god, it was a treat. And you know what? Since this is my very first review of a game, I'm gonna treat myself to something else. If you couldn't gather already, I adored Requiem. It was a very fun game, and I feel like it paid a lot of respect to, the past series, but, I understand that a lot of people disagree with that. I'm going to try to keep it pretty much spoiler free, but at a certain point, I will want to talk about the story, so I will warn you before the spoilers start. So if you do not want anything known of like the actual story, I'll just let you know at that point so you know when to click away from the video. The gameplay feel of it, I loved it a lot. I actually had so much fun with the game immediately after beating it, after the second day of playing it, I immediately started another run. And in that run, I did pretty much what you could do in all their other remakes. Essentially, there's like little challenge systems built into it in which you can spend money at the special shop in which you could unlock other stuff to play with in the game. And a recurring one is essentially speedrunning the game. And I figured, what better time to actually start speedrunning it than when it's completely fresh on my mind? But the only reason I bring that up is just to emphasize how much fun I had with the game. Is it perfect? No. I think it did a lot of things well, and it was a great way to keep me hooked. What I think it did well on was whenever you play as Grace, you feel genuinely like it's a horror experience. And just like in Resident Evil 7, you had to be a lot more careful and a bit more stealthy, at least at the start. And Grace is practically this game's Ethan in terms of gameplay-wise. Like, all of her mechanics, for the most part, are pretty much similar to how Ethan played in Resident Evil 7 and 8. And then there's Leon. You ever play a game where, like, it lets you play as, like, the OP character or, like, the villain super temporarily so you can get like, an extremely, like, powerful sense of, like, oh, yeah, I'm him. It's like playing, like, Venom in a Spider-Man game, essentially. That's what it felt like playing as Leon. The moment you switch from Grace back to Leon, it's just like, okay, there's nothing to fear anymore. Time to rip and fucking tear. And it was so satisfying. It was like a good little break in between the feelings of being completely helpless and lost, and then jumps right into, okay, gotta fuck everything up. And he feels really good to play as well. Now, in terms of the overall gameplay experience, I feel like it did run a kind of short. Both Leon and Grace, I feel like, at least needed one extra long zone. I'll get into that when I talk about the spoilers, but that's just how I feel in a more general sense. Now, another thing I didn't particularly like was the lack of puzzles, truly. There is one extremely, like, intricate puzzle in the game, but it's bonus content technically. It's not like a required piece. And in some senses, that's kind of a good thing because it kind of keeps you moving and keeps you going through the narrative. At the exact same time, I like the puzzles in these kind of games. So I guess it is nice that we do have the optional puzzle after, we beat the game. And it's not void of puzzles, but like, what is there, it really isn't that impressive, or it's kind of, it's truly a no-brainer because sometimes the resolutions are like in the exact room. But on the plus side, it's not as bad as like Resident Evil 4 remake, whereas like you're trying to solve a puzzle and then you're like looking around the room and Ashley kind of just gives you the answer to the puzzle when you're trying to just figure out yourself. On the plus side, there's none of that, but there's still like a pretty big lack of puzzles. But as I said, it might not be a negative thing for a lot of people. But man, like my favorite Resident Evil is 7 out of all of them. So having a great portion of the game where like I got to revisit that feeling was so nice. I was so happy about that. I adored playing as Grace. And I really did love Resident Evil 4, the original and the remake. So then also being able to have that over-the-top action shooter to kind of like take a break from one aspect of the game to go into another aspect that I also liked, it was just so great. But another gripe I didn't like, actually I'll save that, because technically it's a spoiler. On top of being a new character, Grace actually gets her own unique crafting system as well, which I liked a lot. And technically, it's pretty resource limited too, so you can't just like have an infinite supply of whatever you want with her. I'm avoiding saying what it is because I'd like you to discover it yourself if you have not played it yet. But it kind of goes well with her occupation, kind of. She's an FBI analyst, so unlike Leon, she's not a combat ready specialist, so and that's going to reflect in her gameplay. She's scared, her hands are shaking when she's aiming the gun, she's tripping and falling whenever she's running if you're playing in third person. She's constantly like at the verge of a panic attack. It's because she was never built or prepared to be in this kind of situation at all. All right, so now at this very point is when I'm going to start going into the spoilers and talking about the story. So feel free to click off the video, and thanks for watching. All right, so as we just established, Grace is an FBI analyst. So, all of her experience is practically, behind a desk or going to crime scenes with, other officers. So this is when it gets kind of weird, story-wise. So her boss comes up to her and is like, hey, I feel like, we're going to have another bioterror incident, and I'm going to need you to investigate and see what's it's about. So this, as we already talked about, she's not like a combat person, so she's like, okay, but she's also informed this place that she has to investigate is a pretty traumatic like thing to revisit because it's where her mother died. But yeah, ultimately she agrees to go, and you can already tell that she's pretty socially inept, kind of. It could be her being overwhelmed because she is having to revisit such a traumatic thing. And the descriptions about her, she's practically like a loner. So she herself is pretty socially inept, just, from the get-go. So adding everything together, she's going to be freezing up. She's going to be stammering a whole lot more. She's going to be choking on her words constantly. So anyway, she gets there at the hotel, and she's greeted by an officer. A single officer, I guess that's like, either doing patrol or guarding the area to make sure nobody enters it. And from what I gather, he's the only one. Now, I don't know if he's there to assist her in any way or if he's just generally there to patrol. It's never really emphasized, but it's really weird that something this like big, this sensitive, and this potentially dangerous, that like at most she's like, and this is being kind of generous because as I said, it doesn't really go into it. At most she's just given one officer as backup. I don't know, that just feels really weird, especially because when you switch to Leon, you see that they're at an active crime scene, and yes, it's active, so there are going to be more officers there, but Leon is there personally to investigate because it's another bioterror situation. So it just feels really odd to see somebody that's not combat ready or anything like that to a situation practically alone with somebody that's not really trained to possibly fight off something as insane like that if she had to deal with it. I don't know. That just felt really odd to me. It was fun for the plot because, it gets us thrown into a scary situation. It's just really odd, just kind of dumb. But that entire sequence was pretty cool because, it really, if you're just going into it kind of faithfully and walking through the building, checking out all the details, it is so atmospheric, and it's great. It was a very immersive experience playing as her, especially if you play in the originally designed Grace as first person, Leon third person. But I'm not going to break down the entire story bit by bit. I kind of just wanted to poke fun at the little holes I've seen, so I'm going to continue to do that. But then I'll go into what I also dislike about the game, but do like about the game. So another hole in the story. Actually, I don't know if hole's the right word, but it's just kind of funny. So, okay, so when you get to play as Leon, you're fighting on the streets, killing these people that are suddenly turned into zombies. And you're given the option as part of the tutorial to use the Requiem, which is, Leon's magnum, to insta-kill them and just blow them away. I saved my Requiem ammo just because I was curious, or at least on my second run, I was curious if I saved it, if Grace would be able to, have, all the ammo of Requiem for her run. Because Leon gives her his gun, so she has something to defend herself. So when I switched to Grace, I had at least 5 or when I was Leon, I had at least 5 ammos of the Magnum. But then Leon gives Grace the gun and only has 1 bullet. Now, I don't know what the implication is here, but it was almost like, listen, if you gotta, just dome yourself. I mean, I guess that's an act of mercy, but Leon, you had more bullets. Give them to her. What the fuck? You have a gun. You have another handgun. You can give her, like, the other 5. Like, were you expecting the pull it off her corpse and or something later? Did you not think that she'd be able to utilize it properly and would waste ammo, so you held on to more of your own? What the fuck, dude? Another really weird thing is when you're playing as Grace, and you gotta remember, she's an FBI analyst, so she should be able to decipher things herself. So one of the puzzles you gotta do is there are 3 boxes, and on each box there are 3 symbols: a full moon, or not full moon, a full sun, a star, and a crescent moon. And you have to do 4 inputs to figure to open said boxes. And they all had Braille on them as well. The first 2 had Braille and the pictures on them, so you could tell, which one's which. But on the 3rd box, the pictures were scratched off or something. So rather than trying to figure out the Braille yourself by going to another box, maybe writing down the indentations and just figuring it was so possible to figure it out yourself. Especially because the code to that one was already given to you and in the exact same room. So there's no reason that I couldn't have just backtracked, figured out the code myself, and then hit the input in. No, Grace met a blind girl pretty much locked in a cell and decided, you know what? I gotta bring this little girl into all of this danger. I'm gonna have to just carry her to this box, which is dumb, like incredibly irresponsible, because she was pretty much safe in that cell. Another thing that she could have done was she could have like got a piece of paper or something and poked holes into it and essentially like brought the paper back to Emily, which is the blind girl, and got her to decipher it that way as well. But she truly did the dumbest course of action and brought this, defenseless little girl into such immediate danger just because I think this was just a way, a plot device so that Emily would be more involved with the story and then get abducted, and then Grace would keep going on this adventure and have to test herself. I can get all that. I feel like they could have just done that in a different way. I just felt like this particular way was really dumb. And it kind of goes against the idea of her background, because as I said, she's an FBI analyst. She should have been able to figure out something this simple. And then the final thing I'll bully Grace for is she essentially is escaping this helicopter with another man and Emily, and it crashes. Emily gets hurt and she's pretty much bleeding out. So Grace and Emily escape and are in this service area. And Grace is applying pressure to the wound to make sure she doesn't bleed out and sets her down on a box. And then she hears the monster that initially took Emily and is determined to go and put it down. So to do this, she leaves the little girl, doesn't like wrap anything around her to, prevent her from bleeding out more. She just kind of just leaves her on the box, doesn't even tell her to put the pressure on herself, just kind of leaves her on the box and goes in and kills the monster and comes back and oh no, Emily is dead. It's like what did you expect? And I'm not even really gonna fault Grace for this because, like, as I said, there's a lot of kind of inconsistent writing done. I like her as a character a lot, but it feels kind of like they shoehorned a lot of stuff that really doesn't give her character justice and was pretty short-sighted. So I try not to judge her character because of that, because I like her design, I like her character, and I liked playing her segments a ton. Just those few things that, like, it's just like it makes no sense. It just makes none. Now for the Leon segments, like, I'm noticing a lot of people surprisingly did not like it. I mean, a lot of people do like it, but I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't try to talk about the opinions of people on Twitter because everybody's looking for a reason to hate something nowadays. But with like the Leon thing, I feel like what I did not like about playing as the Leon was there doesn't feel anything unique about utilizing different weapons, truly. It's more like this thing packs more of a punch, this thing packs more of a punch, this thing packs a lot of punches. And that's pretty much it. Whereas with Resident Evil 4, for example, like there are multiple different handgun variants, and with the handgun variants, I felt like, they had their own utilities. Some of them would pierce more, some of them did a lot of damage, but were lacking in a lot of other ways. Felt like there was more love and care in their designs in comparison to Leon and his weapons. Another thing I did not like was, the lack of options as Grace. But again, it in this case it kind of makes sense because as we said that she's not really a combat person. So it kind of makes sense for her to be more limited to, her concoctions and her one handgun because that's, truly all she knows. She probably wouldn't even know how to utilize a machine gun or a shotgun, for example. So it makes sense. I would just like more, but that's just a me thing. So I try not to. I'm not gonna put that against the game and for Grace's section. But for Leon's, he's the combat guy. He's going through and he's fucking all the shit up. He's the Terminator. So for his guns to not have as much personality as they did in the last game, it just didn't feel great. I say last game. I'm referring to the remake, not 6. But it was fun. I really liked that we didn't have to, constantly repair an axe at a vendor or anything like that. But at the exact same time, because, you essentially had an unlimited melee weapon, it took away from the combat to a degree, too. Because you weren't forced to think as much. You could literally just, and what I did a lot of time was, I decided, you know what, I want to conserve on a lot of stuff, so I'm going to just go in there and kill everybody with my axe, and I was able to. Not on insanity mode, of course, but it was very easy to stun lock most enemies with the axe. Especially some of the hardest enemies, like the blister heads, for example. You can stun lock them until you get to the point you can instantly kill them with the axe. So those are my gripes. I mean, I know I did a lot of complaining and kind of poking fun at it, but I would legitimately say this is top 3 Resident Evil games for me. A lot of people did not like a lot of the reuse stuff. A lot of people did not like the fact that, it completely essentially ignored the existence of like the female cast from, from the past games, with the exception being Sherry, of course. And yeah, it was kind of disappointing, but still, it was still a very, very solid experience. So if I had to put it on the scale, I'd probably give the game an 8 out of 10. Because I still find myself like picking it up here and there just to have fun, essentially as a horror shooter. It definitely could have stuff that it can add upon, and it doesn't have the best replayability, admittedly. But as a Resident Evil game, I thought it was great. But yeah, if you are looking to play it, and if you made it to this part, well, you spoiled it for yourself, so that sucks. But if you have played it, I'd love to hear about it and hear your opinions and what you thought of the game. Where you feel like it worked, where you feel like it didn't work. I find it interesting. And I feel like on YouTube it might be, I don't know, it might be better than the conversations that are being had on Twitter. Especially because Twitter, essentially rewards negative engagement. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And yeah, thanks for listening.